Hello everyone, good evening to all of you. I am Xavier Pradeep Singh hosting this ELTAI Webinar 86. On behalf of ELTAI, I welcome all of you to this webinar. Before we proceed with introducing this moderator and the speaker, I'd like to play a short video clipping about ELTAI. Welcome back, all of you. I'd like to share an important piece of information at this point of time. We have some technical issues in sending automated emails with links of the feedback form after the webinar is over. So today I will be sharing the links to the feedback form in the chat box after the Q&A session. So participants, kindly fill in the feedback form. After the Q&A session is over, the links will be shared in the chat box. We'll also try sending the emails with the feedback link manually. With this piece of information, I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's webinar, Tusharika Limaye. Tusharika Limaye is a teacher trainer at Sigma Educational Resource and Education Forum. She is an active member of ELTAI Pune chapter. ELTAI Pune chapter is hosting, coordinating this webinar. She has around 30 years of teaching experience. She is also an acclaimed content writer for a number of reputed companies in India, Qatar, Singapore, and UK. Her ongoing PhD research is on universal grammar and second language acquisition. Over to you, ma'am. We welcome you.
Thank you very much. So, today we are all here attending the 86th ELTAI webinar, and the title for today's webinar is Stimulating Language Acquisition, Critical Abilities and Literary Competence through the Aesthetics and Creativity of Poetry, Pedagogic Motivations and Directions. We have with us a renowned resource person, Dr. Vijay Singh Thakur. He is a great man who has done great work and has great experience. So it is a great pleasure to introduce him. Dr. Vijay Singh Thakur is an associate professor in the Department of English Language and Literature of Dhofar University, Salalah, Oman. Currently, he is the Assistant Dean of the College of Arts and Applied Sciences of the university. Prior to becoming Assistant Dean, he was the head of English Language and Literature Department of Dhofar University. He holds a doctorate degree in Applied Sociolinguistics. His main publications are two books. The first one is Discourse Analysis of a Novel, Theory and Method. And the second one is Sociolinguistic Perspectives of Politeness in Communication, and two jointly edited books on effective writing methodologies and critical perspectives on EFL Assessment. He has also published 35 research papers and articles, delivered 21 presentations at international conferences, 9 invited webinars in the field of applied sociolinguistics, discourse stylistics, cross-cultural pragmatics, TESOL pedagogy, and research. His other academic contributions include one completed and one ongoing Ph.D. thesis, supervision, in an Indian university, and evaluation of 37 Ph.D. and 10 master's theses from the universities in South Africa, India, Qatar, and Oman. He is an associate editor and editor on the editorial boards of 4 international journals indexed by Scopus and ERIC, namely the Asia TEFL Journal, Journal of English as an International Language, English Scholarship Beyond Borders, and International Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. He is also an active member of an international not-for-profit academic organization called English Scholars Beyond Borders. So we are very eager to listen to his talk on stimulating language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence through the aesthetics and creativity of poetry. So we will have something here about poetry, and there is definitely going to be certainly going to be something valuable for the teachers. So now I request Dr. Thakur to begin with his talk. Over to you, sir.
Sir, could you turn on your mic, sir?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Tusharika, for this detailed introduction. Before I begin my presentation today, I would like to thank the central leadership of ELTAI, Professor Ilango, Professor Mohanraj, Professor Ramani, and Professor Patil in particular, who got me connected to ELTAI, Pune chapter, and national body, and this is second invitation through him, so I'm very happy to give a talk before you. I would also like to thank the whole ELTAI team who is very professionally facilitating this webinar. So with thanks and appreciation, I begin my talk. As already introduced, my talk today is on stimulating language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence through the aesthetics and creativity of poetry, pedagogic motivations, and directions. The main objective of today's talk is based on pedagogic motivation and direction, which I have drawn from the literature on language acquisition, critical thinking, and literary competence. I am going to briefly demonstrate how purposive and persevering practice of higher order thinking strategies, abbreviation comes at HOT strategies, they are HOT strategies, such as fostering inquiry-oriented thinking and encouraging open-ended discussions using poetry in English language as well as literature classrooms, which can lead to consequent development of language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence. More focused specific aims are how to make poetry conducive to language learning, how to expand students' linguistic, emotional, and cultural awareness, how to stimulate their imagination and add motivational buzz to classroom activities, how to develop and enhance critical thinking capabilities through Socratic notion of deep questioning, how to develop successful reading and thereby successful readers through active interaction with authentic texts, which is poetry today, how to develop a desire to write, how to make reading and writing intensely interactive activities, how to promote effective reading of poems and help students develop literary competence, and how to enhance learners' personal enrichment as a result. Before we get down to discuss and experience how a task-driven approach to poetry can be used to stimulate language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence of the learners in ELL classrooms, let us examine some key principles of language acquisition which are linked with the use of authentic materials, such as poetry. Principle of language acquisition 1. A prerequisite for language acquisition is that the learners experience language in use, which is rich, which is recycled, which is meaningful, which is embodied, and which is comprehensible. Therefore, while designing tasks and activities on poetry, we need to make sure, as Tomlinson 2013 and Tomlinson and Masuhara 2018 suggest, that the learners experience language in purposeful use. The language the learners are exposed to is authentic. The language input is contextualized. The learners engage in a lot of interaction in relation to their input. Principle number 2, learners need to be affectively and cognitively engaged in their language experience. In order to satisfy this principle, we need to base materials on texts or tasks which are likely to achieve affective and cognitive engagement, both types of engagement. Make use of activities which get learners to deepen and articulate their feelings and thoughts, stimulate emotive and cognitive responses through literature and some other provocative texts, issue-focused texts, personalization, and through localization. Stimulate learners to think and feel before, whilst, and after using the language. Set achievable challenges which help to raise the learner's self-esteem. Make the learning environment and learning materials as attractive and enjoyable as possible. Principle number 3 of language acquisition: learners need opportunities to use the language for contextualized and purposeful communication. In order to satisfy this principle, what we need to do is provide many opportunities for the learners to produce language in order to achieve intended outcomes. Make sure that output activities are designed so that the learners are using language rather than just practicing specified features of it. Design output activities so that they help learners to develop their ability to communicate fluently, accurately, appropriately, and effectively. Make sure that the output activities are fully contextualized and maximize opportunities for learner-learner communication, communicative interaction. Before we move further, a brief note on linguistic competence and literary competence. Most of the teachers are familiar with Chomsky's notion of grammatical competence, which is the idea that all speakers of any language possess an internalized grammar which allows them to produce and understand utterances which they may not have heard before, provided that these utterances conform to the grammatical rules of the language they are speaking. On similar lines, some theorists, in particular Jonathan Culler, have argued that effective readers of literary texts possess literary competence, in that they have implicit understanding of and familiarity with certain conventions which allow them to take the words on the page of a play or a poem or any other literary work and convert them into literary meanings. And this is how they develop literary competence. A note on critical thinking: unlike ordinary thinking, which is an inborn human activity, human ability, critical thinking needs to be inculcated through implicit and/or explicit instruction. If teachers purposely and persistently practice higher order thinking strategies, for example, dealing in class with real-world problems, encouraging open-ended class discussions, and fostering inquiry-oriented experiments, there is a good chance for a consequent development of critical thinking abilities. Now, the question is, why literature? Any interpretation of a piece of literature is conditioned by three factors: what is in the language itself, what is in the context of communication, what is in the head of the readers, that is, the assumptions and knowledge they bring to a text. Therefore, it is needless to say that different readers will inevitably bring different experiences to text. And because of this reason, there are neither identical or ideal readers, nor ideal and identical readings, which provides a fertile ground for cognitive engagement and interaction. As Simpson argues, complex and varied patterns of meaning and interpretation permeate all texts. So this aspect of varied textual meanings can be and needs to be exploited in ELL classroom through the use of literature. Some features of literature. Why literature in ELL classroom? Because it is authentic, evidently analyzable. It has complex themes, fresh, unexpected use of language. It can be a valid object of study to sharpen our critical faculties and develop our sensibilities. It is revealing in nature. The difference between an academic writing or normal writing and literature is that of between informing and revealing. So this revealing nature can be utilized to stimulate the imagination of our students. Literature encourages meaningful interaction. It expands language awareness. It helps educate the whole person. It is motivating as it holds high status in every culture and in every country. Why poetry in particular? Simply for the reason that we are using poetry today. These features make it a special form of literature. Rhythmicality. It has a high rhythmical nature. Performance and recitability. Ambiguity. It has a public meaning. It has a personal meaning. Non-triviality. Poetry offers significant input for learners and enhances their experience of existence. Universality. Poetry as forms of language use is universal among human beings, and their themes are also common to all cultures. Playfulness. The experiment of the language in poetry provides the opportunity to play with it and test its elasticity. Reactional language. Poetry gives people access to react personally to another person's verbal sensibility. Motivation. Poetry has a motivational force of appreciating what is considered to be difficult. Poetry offers greater scope for the exploitation of the semantic sources of language than prose. Complexity of thought and multiplicity of meaning offers scope for unfolding many layers of meaning. Poetry provides unparalleled opportunities for interaction, that is, teacher-to-student interaction, student-to-student interaction, author-to-reader interaction. The choice of poetry is also driven by Tomlinson's mandate on the potential engagement in texts. He suggests collect or create texts which has the potential of engagement to achieve interaction between the text and your senses, your feelings, views, and intuitions. Such texts can stimulate multidimensional representation in which inner speech, sensory images, and affective stimuli combine to make the texts meaningful. Such a representation can achieve the affective impact and deep processing. Poetry can certainly offer these opportunities of engagement in ELL classrooms. Now, the text-driven approach that we are using in exploiting poetry in ELL classrooms, these can be the activities and tasks that we can design on them. There should be readiness activity, initial response activity, intake response activity, development activity, discovery activity, and then sometimes for better scaffolding, further development activity. So, as we have already said, that today's presentation is focused on stimulating language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence. The analytical tasks and activities which I am going to share in this presentation hereafter are based on a number of poems that are diverse in themes, rich in their tone and tenor, and unique in their vantage points, which will trigger and target the use of hot skills, higher order thinking skills and strategies. For instance, interpreting, predicting, analyzing, evaluating, rearranging, recreating, reconstructing, critiquing, etc. Needless to say that These hot skills are based on Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives and its action verbs. The tasks and activities will also stimulate literary competence of the learners. Now, let us begin with the first activity, which is traveling in memory lane. We can give a task to students and ask them to revisit their school days when they were a child, not as a grown-up person, which they are now. We can ask them to recollect whatever they saw that day, first day in school, whatever happened to them that day, whatever they experienced that day, happy moments, fears, fellow students you saw and met, the school gate, the school building, the classroom, the teachers, the lessons, and jot down your memories of the first day in school in a childlike manner. And then write a short narrative paragraph. After this task on traveling into one's childhood memory lanes, the following task can be given, which is designed on a beautiful poem, First Day at School by Roger McGaw. Let us look at, and we can ask, while reading the poem, Child's First Day at School, students need to imagine that they are that child and that they are standing alone in the playground during the first day at school. This involves recalling and relating skill, which is cognitive skill. As you read the poem, try to see in your mind what the child could see in the playground. Again, recalling and relating. Identify the expressions that make the reading of this poem enjoyable for you. Discuss why. This involves analyzing, explaining. Now, look at this poem. A million, billion miles from home, waiting for the bell to go. To go where? Why are they all so big, other children? So noisy, so much at home, they must have been born in uniform, lived all their lives in playgrounds, spent the years inventing games that don't let me in, games that are rough, that swallow you up. And the railings all around, the railings, are they to keep out wolves and monsters? Things that carry off and eat children, things you don't take sweets from, perhaps they are to stop us getting out. Running away from lessons. Look at the spelling, lesson. What does a lesson look like? Sounds small and slimy. They keep them in glass rooms, not classrooms. Whole rooms made of glass, imagine. I wish I could remember my name. Mummy said it would come in useful, like wellies. When there is puddles, lello wellies, I wish she was here. I think my name is soon on somewhere. Perhaps the teacher will read it for me. Teacher, the one who makes the tea. So this is a very interesting poem, and they can connect with this first day of this boy's school in the poem and their own childhood experiences when they went to the school and their first day in school. Now look at second task. It's a dialogue poem, which are good for work on expression as suggested by Malley. Though here this poem is conveyed more through intonation than volume. Look at this poem. Title is Goodbye. Don't lie, she said. I try, he said. My eye, she said. Don't cry, he said. I'll die, she said. Oh my, he said. Goodbye, she said. This is a simple poem. What I did, I discussed with my students of Introduction to Creative Writing course that I taught a couple of semesters ago. I discussed with them that the above poem is dramatic in the sense that there are protagonists who engage in a dialogue here. I asked the students to work on it in pairs to reconstruct a full version of the dialogue. If you look at the tone and tenor involved in this small dialogue, it must have continued further. What would have probably developed between the two persons were having in the poem, this dialogue? This involved them in such matters as relationship of the couple. This led to a good discussion and comment, and the students developed interesting pieces of dialogues. This can also be done as a group task, which will generate a lot of interaction, a lot of conversation, and it will integrate perhaps all the skills: reading, speaking, listening, and writing. Then I gave my students a task to develop a creative dialogic poem on the converse theme. As against goodbye, I gave the theme hi. And the students were able to create some interesting and humorous short poems on similar lines. Next is a very famous poem, Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. You are familiar with this poem. My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. And it continues. Since time is limited, so I'll not read each and everything. I'll just discuss the tasks and activities. So after reading these poems, comprehension questions. Who's the speaker in the poem? How do you know? Who is the person spoken to? Does the word love refer to the feeling of love of the person loved? What does he compare his love to? Which expressions in the poem describe the beauty of the speaker's beloved? Which of the two persons referred to in the poem is going away? Which expression in the last stanza tell you about this? How long will the speaker be away from his beloved? What does the speaker promise his beloved? What does 10,000 miles mean? Then some critical thinking questions. Why is the word red repeated in a red, red rose? This involves cognitive skill of explaining. Explain the simile in my love is like a red, red rose. Applying, analyzing. What kind of love does the poem express? Explaining, evaluating the kind of love. What is hyperbole? What is its function as a figure of speech in this particular poem? So relating and analyzing. Can the sea go dry and can the rocks melt with the sun? Why does the poet say this? What's the way of expression called? Interpreting, analyzing, explaining. And here we have some more critical thinking questions, and you can see the cognitive skills which have been taken from Bloom's taxonomy are involved here. Let us move to another task. Here what I have done, I have found two poems and the title is Death. And first I did some brainstorming, like the feelings and the words associated with death. And then I asked them, can the death be delicious? Then the students were surprised. Then I introduced the poem and asked them to analyze, critically think about it, and do the tasks. First one is Delicious Death by Gage. And this is related to food habits. He liked them baked, he liked them fried, smothered in cheese. And next one is the vantage point is different, not the food habit. I created for myself a most delicious death, one of the delirious mind, numbing kind, for I need to break my wings once more. Think not that this, right, dear friends. And it continues. Last stanza is, look into my black eyes, there is such a delicious death. Hear my screams, likened to an angel, as I scream her words in my last breath. Then I gave these critical thinking questions. What is the central idea in the two poems? Discuss the significance of the title in the two poems on death. Does it have the same meaning and effect in the two poems? Justify your answer. Is the idea of death presented in the two poems differently? How? Are the ideas presented in the two poems exaggerated? That is, they are far from the reality? Why do you think so? So a lot of critical thinking, as highlighted in red, are involved. And identify the two most important lines from each of the poems on death, removing which the poem will collapse and lose its creative and cognitive impact. So like this, I tried to exploit many possibilities of critical thinking. Discuss the poet's vantage point in the two poems. Compare and contrast. How would you react to the situation in the two poems on death from a social point of view? Now, next task is on creating a pied poem, creating a poem from an existing short poem. This also involves a lot of creativity and critical thinking. So first I gave the example. This is Oscar Wilde's poem. And this is a poem, pied poem, created by Martin Gardner, using the same words but rearranging them. Now look at this one. The vilest deeds, like poison weeds, bloom well in prison air. It is only what is good in man that wastes and withers there. Look at Gardner's pied poem, which is created on this. Prison bloom and withers, poison the air well. What good is there in that? Is it only in deeds? Vilest man wastes like weeds. After giving this model, I gave them an extension task, a poem by Pablo Neruda from the book of Questions, and asked them to create, using the same words, rearrange them in any order and create a very creative pied poem, where high level of creativity and critical thinking is required. And then the last task is, there is a poem, Refugees, by Brian Bilston. Now, if you read the poem on refugees in this order, they have no need of our help. So do not tell me these haggard faces could belong to you or me. Should life have dealt a different hand, we need to see them for who they really are. Chancers and scroungers, layabouts and loungers with bombs up their sleeves, cutthroats and thieves, they are not welcome here. We should make them go back to where they came from. They cannot share our food, share our homes, share our countries. Instead, let us build a wall to keep them out. It's not okay to say these are people just like us. A place should only belong to those who are born there. Do not be so stupid to think that world can be looked at another way. This is a poem. Now look at the same poem in the reverse order. Look at, the last sentence was, the world can be looked at another way. Do not be so stupid to think that a place should only belong to those who are born there. These are people just like us. It is not okay to say, build a wall to keep them out. Instead, let us share our countries, share our homes, share our food. They cannot go back to where they came from. We should make them welcome here. They are not cutthroats and thieves, with bombs up their sleeves, layabout and loungers, chancers and scroungers. We need to see them for who they really are. Should life have dealt a different hand, These haggard faces could belong to you or me. So do not tell me they have no need of our help. Look at the creativity of the poet, the way he has arranged the lines. And when you read from top to bottom, it has one perspective. And when you read from bottom to up direction, then it has another perspective. Then I gave the task, now compare the two versions of the poem, your two interpretations, and reflect upon the narrative art and the creativity of the poet. And here you are involving the cognitive skills of comparing, analyzing, evaluating, critiquing, appraising, all higher order thinking skills. Which version of the poem, that is the original one or the rearranged one, do you like more or most, and why? Justify your answer. Do you think the two versions of the poem reflect and represent the two attitudes and the two faces of the individuals and the societies? Which one would you support, the inhuman and ugly, or the loving and humane, and why? And concluding remarks here. The list of tasks and activities on poetry shared and discussed in this presentation are neither exhaustive nor conclusive. They are meant to serve as models for using poetry in educational practices of ELT and ELL. Creative and innovative teachers can design and practice many more such tasks and activities set on several other poems and provide their students with stimulating teaching and learning experiences in the English language and literature classrooms. Creative potential of poetry can be fruitfully used and exploited to expand students' linguistic, emotional, and cultural awareness. Poetry can also stimulate students' imagination and add motivational buzz to classroom activities. A considered and considerable integration and use of poetry in ELL classroom can make listening, speaking, reading, writing intensely interactive activities and promote language acquisition. Planned use of poetry can promote active interaction with the text. Therefore, it can be successfully used for developing students' critical abilities and literary competence. In sum and spirit, by applying creative and critical thinking approaches to ELT and ELL, we can enrich and deepen our students' learning experiences and enhance their personal enrichment for the strong reason that is rooted in the findings of the studies of Butler, Pentini, and Bong 2017, and also in the findings of 2018 study by Kuhn, which claim that mastering critical thinking is a better predictor of successful life decisions than other factors such as intelligence. So critical thinking is more important than intelligence. And these are the references which I have used in this presentation. And many thanks for participating in this ELTAI webinar. For more details and discussion on the use of poetry in ELL classroom, you can refer to my published article. There you will find more poems and more activities which target not only language acquisition, but critical thinking and creativity. So thank you so much. I hope I finished in time. I didn't exceed the time limit.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
Yes, that was really great, sir. You actually spelled out every concept that you have mentioned in the title. Today, you showed us how poetry is a platter of a variety of literary potentials. So, before we come to the summary of what we said, first I think we will tackle some questions that have been raised by some participants. So here is a question from Anil Mishra.
Okay, ma'am.
How to differentiate between the acquisition of language for normal use and for a specific use? What aspect of language needs to be taught? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah, please.
Yes. How to differentiate between the acquisition of language for normal use and for a specific use? What aspect of language needs to be taught?
So there are two domains of language use. The conversational language is different from the language that we practice and develop inside the classroom, that is related to more with studies, that is more academic in nature. So if we have to develop, conversation skills, then we need to communicate and use the language which is not used inside the classroom. More personalized language that goes for normal communication. But for academic purposes, it is a different language. The context is different. I'm not saying grammar is different, sentence construction is different, but the style is different.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Here's another question from T.H. Lawrence. Don't we stray away from the original concepts of the author when we resort to composing pied or reverse poems?
Okay, can you repeat again? Don't we?
Don't we stray away from
Okay.
the original concepts of the author when we resort to composing pied or reverse poems?
Yeah, that is the task itself. We have to stray away from the original concepts. You may create a new concept. If you look at the example that we have given in the pied poem created by Gardner on Oscar Wilde's poem, same words he has rearranged, but they are totally two different poems. Theme is different, ideas are different, meaning is different. So yes, we certainly stray away from the original concepts. Sometimes there might be overlap, also depends on the creativity of the individual who is attempting the task.
Okay.
And that is the whole purpose of such tasks, is to explore one's own creativity, not imitating, not copying.
Okay. We can take only two more questions because we don't have much time.
Please, ma'am.
The first one is, would you say, sir, that it is best to let students play around with the words of a literary text and thus bring literature down from the pedestal, as Alan Malley suggested decades ago? Shall I read it again?
Yeah, please.
Would
Is
you
it
say-
related to the quality diminishes, the standard diminishes?
Sir, it is from Ramani PN. If the participant would like to answer this question, because this is what the question goes this way. Would you say that it is best to let the students play around with the words of a literary text and thus bring literature down from the pedestal, as Alan Malley suggested decades ago?
Yes, certainly. I can read now his comment. Yes, students, it is good to let students play around with the words of the literary text and bring literature down from the pedestal and explore, depending on their capacities and level, and let them help explore their own creativity, because everyone is not a established creative writer.
Okay. And the last question today is from Dr. Z.N. Patil. Can we use the last 4 lines of Stopping by Woods or The Solitary Reaper to teach language functions? The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, miles to go before I sleep. Or the last 4 lines, I listened motionless and still. And as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore long after it was heard no more. So can we use these last 4 lines of these 2 poems to teach the language functions? That is his question.
Yeah, we can certainly use, like here, for example, repetition, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So language functions, yes, can be taught by using these last 4 lines.
There is one more good question, sir, from Dr. Gajanan.
Okay, ma'am.
Can a poem in native language be of any help for second language acquisition in the classroom?
Yes, it can help, at least the interest, because creativity is there in whether it is in language A or B. Creative texts are creative texts. So exploring creativity. So suppose students are at a low level and not very proficient in English, maybe we can use a poem from their mother tongue and set some tasks on them to explore, analyze creative features, creative aspects, and then move to English, compare them, and then they can have two perspectives. They can be used.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Because of lack of time, we cannot address any other questions. So I can say that Sir has shown us today how poetical texts can be exploited for stimulating language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence. He mentioned the theory in the beginning. That is fine. But the most important and most valuable thing for us is he actually mentioned the tasks which can be carried out, which can be given to the students so that language can be acquired, second language can be acquired, their critical abilities can be developed, and even literary competence, especially the warm-up activities, sir, that you suggested. The way the warm-up activities point towards the theme of the poem, that was simply wonderful. So we can think as teachers before teaching a poem, we can think what kind of warm-up activities we can conduct and how we can keep the students engaged through some of the tasks that you have mentioned and also demonstrated. It is necessary that there should be engagement between the text, the poetic text, the feelings, the emotions, sensory images, and the affective impact. Especially the questions that you gave after completing the poem, they were all based on higher order thinking skills. So today we came to know how these higher order thinking skills are very important. It is necessary to focus on them so that we can actually make use of these poetic texts in order to stimulate language acquisition, critical abilities, and literary competence. So the entire demonstration in such a short period, in such a nice way, it was explained, including the actual poems, the questions based on the poems, and the tasks that are to be given to the students. So that was really very nice. Thank you very much. We have definitely learned a lot from your session, and we shall look into that article which you mentioned at the end, and we are sure that it is going to help us a long way. We move towards the end of this webinar. First of all, I should thank the organizing committee of ELTAI India for organizing this webinar. This was organized in association with ELTAI Pune chapter. So I must really thank the Pune chapter, especially our president, Dr. Z.N. Patil, who is a lighthouse for all of us, and all the teaching experience for us.
Thank you, ma'am.
And thank you
for your very generous comments.
And thank you all the participants, of course, because it is the participants who always encourage the speakers and the resource persons to make any webinar a real success. So thanks all of you. And now
I had to rush because of lack of time. So
but
at some points I had to read very fast and skip certain lines.
So, no, sir, but you did justice to everything. I can assure you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I hand over now to the coordinator.
Thank you, ma'am. So, dear participants, I have shared the links to the feedback forms in the chat box. Kindly make use of the feedback links that are available in the chat box. We issue certificates to ELTAI members, students, and foreign participants. So there are 3 different links in the chat box. Kindly make use of the appropriate one. And at this point of time, I'd like to make another announcement about our upcoming webinar. So next week, our webinar will be on self-referencing in academic writing. The speaker is Dr. Chitlapalli Vijay Kumar from BITS Pilani, and the moderator is Dr. Shabreen Sultana Shaikh from ELTAI Guntur chapter. The link to register for this webinar will be sent by email. So kindly make use of the link to register. And we'd like to see you next week. And once again, I remind you about the links to the feedback form that are available in the chat box. There are 3 different links. One for the ELTAI members, the other for students, the last one for foreign participants. Kindly make use of the appropriate one. So I thank all of you for attending this webinar. Let's sign off for this day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.